Different, I know. No Dan today, so I am filling in to kind of manage the show.
Yep.
We did invite Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us today to
You
get
got it,
that
brother.
spot. Dean, we do have Dean here. We are going to talk Joey Chestnuts. We're going to talk hot dog eating. We're going to talk what's going on in the world of logistics today. So get ready, y'all.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Now I see what he's talking about with that tricky button. I don't usually get to play with that button. So how's it going, guys? I seen the show yesterday, Dean. I seen he brought up Joey Chestnuts. You mentioned about hot dogs. You mentioned you were back in your day. You could have taken them on. What is the record? Let's hear about this.
This could have been another one of our war stories from Monday or Friday. But, this was last century, actually. So that sort of, without dating myself too badly, I had 17, I think it was 18 one night. Managed to keep the 18th one down, but that was with an awful lot of beer and hot dogs on the Gold Coast of Australia. If you've been to the Gold Coast, you will know that they have hot dog carts everywhere outside all the bars and nightclubs.
Really?
And if you're a teenager, that's like a rite of passage. That's almost up there with fighting kangaroos on the way home from the pub. True story.
That's crazy.
But an interesting statistic, DJ. I had a quick look at the organization called the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council. Yes, there is one. And average Americans consume 20 billion hot dogs a year. 20 billion. And that works out at 70 hot dogs per person. So I know I don't eat 70 hot dogs on average. So that means the Joey Chestnuts of the world must be right out on the tail end of that bell curve, I would suspect.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, I think he had 60. What did we say? 67 or 63? 63. I don't know if anybody's seen the video. I ended up seeing it because I seen you guys talk about it. So then I looked it up. And he ended up, a guy came in the middle of the whole competition and was, I don't know, trying to show some sign for something. And he just finished scarfing down a hot dog. He chokes this guy, throws him to the side, and just keeps going. And I'm like, wow, what a pro. Now that is a pro.
Oh, that's being focused.
Yes, that's yes. All right, so we got James in with an AO this morning. I like the AO. Maybe that helped you get the win today. Good job, James.
Yeah,
good morning, Daman.
Hey, Daman.
Good morning, y'all. Let's see. What else do we have? We got Lisa. Good morning.
Morning, Lisa.
Oh, hot dogs. Okay, what do we got? Hot dogs are best if they're processed. Yeah.
Hey, so guys,
we're not going to talk about what exactly hot dogs are. Let's not go there.
I got some quick statistics on hot dogs, DJ. We'll consume. This is grilling season, right? I did some statistics on reefer truckload demand as it relates to hot dogs specifically.
Oh, perfect. Well, let's jump right in.
Season.
So James says no way. Go ahead.
Grilling season runs from Memorial Day to Labor Day, right? And so we'll see about 7 billion hot dogs in a 4-week period. No, sorry, to Independence Day, Memorial Day to Independence Day. I guess that would be. It's about 16,000 refrigerated truckloads of hot dogs is how that translates.
Holy moly.
It's not much in the big scheme of reefer volume across the entire country, but it's a lot when you add it to all of the meat and chicken and buns
absolutely.
Not to mention beer. So it's a pretty big deal, the grilling season, of which hot dogs are an integral part.
And now you said that's 7 billion in a 4-week period. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's the grilling season. It's sort of that peak summer season where we consume most of the hot dogs, right? It's as soon as to be Labor Day through to Independence Day.
Yeah, I think Dooner had on What the Truck he showed a picture, I think a couple weeks ago, about a trailer that turned over with hot dogs and went all over the highway. Did you see that, Dean?
No.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't see it.
Yeah. Buckets of stuff that they make hot dogs with. It wasn't
right.
It didn't look good.
All right, off the hot dogs. So what do we got?
Let's go.
Here we go. No way someone is eating hundreds to make gotcha. No. I think it's real. I think there are a lot of, there's dollar dog nights. I don't know if if you guys are in any other states, but I mean in Cleveland a big thing is dollar dog nights at the Indians games on Fridays. And usually they're the cheap hot dogs. They're not the best ones, but people are slamming quite a few of those in an evening. So
yeah,
I believe it.
Absolutely.
Well, it wasn't enough to move the needle on refrigerated rates this week.
So what are we looking at?
Yeah, what are we looking at?
Like we thought. We talked about this on the show a little while ago. Normally dry van and reefer rates kind of peak at July 4, and then they fall away all the way through to kind of Labor Day into Thanksgiving, and then there's some upward lift. But we said, I think I said specifically that I don't think there'll be a material impact on spot rates on July 4, and that pretty much, it was more like a speed bump than a peak in spot rates. Normally they'd run up from April to July 4. There's normally a 20 to 30 cents per mile lift in spot rates, just line haul excluding fuel. Reefer rates this week were only up 3 cents a mile. So normally you'd see something like 4 times that lift in June. That just didn't happen this year. So what you'll see is they ended the week at 232 excluding fuel. That's 55 cents a mile lower than this time last year, but still 21 cents a mile higher than all of the pre-pandemic years prior, going back to 14. So, even though operating costs have gone up probably in the order of 25 cents a mile for an owner-operator, spot rates are still higher than pre-pandemic years. So there's no need for panic just yet. I think dry van rates were flat. Flatbed's cooling off, which is interesting. Flatbed is decreasing now. That looks like we're past the peak in flatbed demand. On the flip side, though, Jeff, on the contract rate side, contract rates are stubbornly positive, was how our FMIC people put it this week. So new rates entering routing guides are still coming in a little bit higher week over week. So there, if you go back in time, they'd be RFPs that were maybe back in the first quarter, still coming in positive. So there are signs the contract market has peaked, but not the rush south that you would normally expect, having seen spot rates decrease so much since June. So, but I think we're definitely at the peak of the freight cycle as it relates to rates.
Yeah, and I've seen some contract rates coming down as the spot market's coming down and the fuel is rising. I saw a few that started dipping a little bit because it's getting pulled down because of the spot market. I don't think it's going to be sustainable. I know you don't either, but I mean, it's going to start rising pretty soon. Within the next several weeks, we'll start seeing a rise in those rates, and then the spot market start rising as well.
Yeah, the temperature control category. So if we look at the change in replacement rates, so these are the rates coming into routing guides versus the rates that are leaving routing guides.
Yep.
So in reefer, replacement rates are coming in at plus 2% in the last 2 weeks versus plus 13% in the prior period at the start of June. So they are, even though they're still positive, they're coming in at a decreasing rate of change. So, but dry van, it's really interesting. Dry van is still stubbornly flat, and I would have thought we'd have started to see contract rates drop off much quicker than they have. Maybe that's a sign that shippers are staying with their routing guides and their preferred top tier carriers more so.
Yeah, and that's great, Dean. When you think about that, because you're in the same corral as your carrier. You're working with your carriers. You keep them on board through the thick of things. You have your lull, you have your highs, but you're feeding them and they're staying on board, which is a positive sign. It's all about the collaboration and continuing to build those relationships.
Definitely.
Great question from Lisa. DJ, do you want me to tackle that? Yeah. Okay. So great question, Lisa. Thanks for being with us so early on the West Coast. It's admirable, especially on a Monday, on a long weekend. I was impressed that you jumped in on Monday. But essentially what that means is, Jeff probably knows more about the preciseness of this, so he can add colour. Shippers send out an RFP inviting carriers to bid on all of their lanes. Those rates go into essentially a massive spreadsheet. It's a little bit more complex than that, but imagine a spreadsheet with the cheapest rate at the top, and then the next carrier down has a slightly higher rate. The third carrier has a slightly higher rate on a particular lane, whether it's Los Angeles to Phoenix, for example. Each carrier bids on that lane based on the volumes and how that affects their network balance and how much they want that business. And that's sort of an ongoing process. So what you've got is this routing guide that a shipper has, and new rates are coming in all the time based on prior RFPs, and then old rates are dropping out as current RFPs come into the routing guide and get locked in for, say, the next year. So what we look at is the rates coming in lower or higher than what's in routing guides, and are they lower or higher than what's exiting routing guides? So whenever you see replacement rates coming in at a slowing rate like that, you get a sense that the overall temperature of the freight market is starting to cool. If I could give you a bathtub analogy, active rates that are in routing guides are like the temperature of the water in the bathtub, and these replacement rates are like the temperature of the water coming out of the tap into the water. So that's how you look at replacement rates. Is the temperature coming into the bathtub hot or cold? Right now, they are still hot, but definitely cooling off.
Cooling down.
I hope that
I love that analogy, Dean. That was a great analogy, actually.
Absolutely. And it's a shame that shippers really shouldn't be jumping off the board, sort of speaking, and hitting those low rates, because it shows no loyalty towards their main carriers and everything. They're trying to save, in the short run, which in the long run is going to hurt them more when they really start diving into the data and the details of exactly how much that costs them to switch from their main carriers to a low carrier. There's a lot of risk that's involved in that. So I don't really recommend doing that, but there's a lot of shippers that do that. And, from the beginning of the year too, because of the sustainability on the RFP process, carriers are coming in with their rates, and then they finally realize over a few months into the contract, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
We can't sustain that rate. I need to take a 7% increase or a 4% increase. Our OR is, off the chain, sort of speaking, and we can't continually go down this road. You don't want to get into that position where you're doing RFP after RFP after RFP. So a lot of shippers out there, what they're doing is short-term RFPs instead of the long contracts over a year, especially with the fuel surcharges that are rising and totally out of control. It's very volatile. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring because you got those spot rates coming down, you got the fuel going up. So you just got to be very careful about that. That's what
Agreed. And Lisa does say thank you for the explanation. It was really a great analogy. So thank you for that, Dean.
Well, it's like we talked about in the show before. If you think about just the difference between contract and spot, contract rates are currently probably 90% of volume being moved. Mm-hmm. That's the climate. They change. Climate changes over very long periods of time, whereas spot rates are like today's weather. So that to use, there's a couple of good, weather/climate analogies you can use to understand the market. But Jeff, let me ask you about this. Have we ever seen the EIA not publish the weekly average for 3 weeks in a row? Their website this morning. This morning says, as of July 5, which is yesterday, we have restored most of our data publications. We will not publish USD diesel prices today. So they've had some serious hardware issues. I've never seen this. But my question to you is, if you were a carrier, would you have been invoicing your shippers using the fuel surcharge from 3 weeks ago and then saying we'll adjust it when the EIA publish the retrospective fuel surcharge, assuming it's lower?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'm just going to use me as an example. Working with the larger companies out there, we create our own fuel surcharge tables that enabled us to keep a level playing field, because as you know, different carriers have different fuel surge charts, and they have different percentages based on whatever they're using at that time. So what we try to do is to level it off, and it's great for freight payment services when you think about it, because you have your base rate and they're up and down. Right now you have a standard fuel surcharge. So a lot of them are falling back on that and using their table as a guideline in order to move it over this bumpy road that the EIA is going through right now. And hopefully they get that up and running.
So they use their own retail diesel price for their own fleets, as opposed to the
that's what we did. We used our own fuel surcharge table, and we handed it out to all the carriers that did business with us. And of course, we did multi-million-dollar business. So we had multiple carriers, like maybe 10, 11 carriers at one time. And again, it was just it was a control factor. Because like I said, all the fuel surcharges tables that they had were all over the place. They were inconsistent. Some were very close, but we wanted to stabilize that. So we created our own.
Yeah, I love it.
I saw West Texas Intermediate drop below $100 yesterday. So I think it's stabilized just over that, but dropping under $100 is significant given where we've been. So I think the general expectation is that diesel prices are going to come down when they publish the number this week.
That's what I'm thinking too, Dean. We'll have to see what happens. James, I think this was to you earlier, Jeff. He said exactly, Jeff. A lot of our customers, carriers, shippers, brokers, are feeling backstabbed, even after years of working together. Yeah, it's
absolutely, James.
It's survival of the fittest right now is what I feel like is going on. I mean, it's not. I mean, just from that Dan. Shout out to Dan. Even since he can't join us, he sent us a report of Walmart charges suppliers. Did you see that? They're starting to charge their suppliers tariffs and stuff.
Yeah, right.
Not a surprise.
That's
not a surprise, especially when they had all the chargebacks and everything. And I sent Dan an email. And, at one time on the chargebacks, we're going back many years ago when I created this Bible for all the big box dealers out there to try to stabilize and understand how you deal with each one. Because a lot of them, they require special pallets to be used. The DIMs have to be a certain height. And then you had must arrive by date plus or minus 1, 2, 3, 4 days. And I used an example of a $3 million shipment that was inbound to Walmart. And 2 of the 3 trailers that arrived were on time, and 1 was 30 minutes late. And they wanted to charge me 10% of the total order value of $3 million or $30,000. You know what I told you, right? Yeah. And it's systemic at one time. That's what Walmart did all the time. We had some pretty big conversations with those guys, but it's not a surprise to me when you think about it.
It's unfortunate, but they have the power. They do have the power. Scott says our pricing is still seeing a huge increase of quarterly RFPs. I feel sometimes shippers don't realize the time it takes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Jeff, I guess a question for both of you and maybe some of our listeners that are more in tune with this, but we've been seeing on our FMIC side, a lot of our large shippers haven't dropped the mini bid completely, but are now looking for more longer term bids to lock in lower rates.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was only a year ago that people were talking about the RFP, the annual RFP being dead. And but now I wonder whether we're just going to revert back to the normal trend of long-term annual bids and then some mini bids on some, heavily held lanes, lots of volume where there's maybe some service failures. What's your thoughts on the long-term bid now?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I mean, we used to do it a long time ago, and the thing is that we're coming up to peak season. And those rates that they have in place right now are not sustainable. They're not. They're going to go up, and you know it too, Dean. That's going to happen. And when that volume starts increasing, and it becomes carrier market, those are those rates are going to skyrocket. So what's the sense of jumping off the bandwagon, going on those lower rates, and now you have to go through the whole exercise, all that time and labor, looking at hundreds of different bids from these carriers. It all comes down with collaboration and building long-term business relationships between the shipper, the carrier, and the service provider. And when you jump off the bandwagon like that, you're creating a huge void in that communication where you're telling them, hey, there's no loyalty here. We're going where the money is and where we can bring that down, back to our bottom line, which isn't necessarily true, because that's going to switch rather soon. It's very soon.
Yeah, it's great.
That fits our MIT study that we saw come out a while ago, where it said that shippers were elephants and carriers were goldfish in terms of
So, yes, we've said that a few times here on this show.
But carriers will go with what's ever on available on an option right now, where shippers have a longer term memory, and that's exactly what Jeff's alluding to there. Although, Jeff, I did talk to a carrier last week, and they said that they see in the flatbed market a lot more larger carriers playing in the spot market, because in flatbed there's a lot more volume that goes into the spot market because of the irregular routing, one-off load destinations for project type freight, all of the accessorials that come with certain loads, permits, escort vehicles, things like that, cranes at the other end. But I was just interested, do you think there's a sense that shippers are more likely to tender out more volume in the spot market in the flatbed space? Because you had some experience in the glass business. You might in Green Bay, didn't you?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that the flatbed volumes in the spot market were about double what they were in dry van and reefer. So that surprised me. I didn't think we'd see that much different volume. So still today, we're seeing a lot of volume in the spot market, and that's why rates overall in flatbed have been higher. Which is an interesting thought process for everyone listening in the non-asset space. Is you've got to be able to price that accordingly.
Yeah, and Dean, I know we talked about this very briefly. It might have been the last show or maybe the show prior to that one, but we're talking about the inbound vessels into Long Beach and Los Angeles, and how we saw an uptick going into Houston. I think you said 24%. Yep. Then we had an uptick in Savannah. I think it was in the single high digits. If I was right, and then into New York, New Jersey, they were about 8.6. So I'm just trying to use logics here as shippers start moving their freight, because maybe they're scared about what had happened. I mean, understandably, right? It was disaster out there. And they start moving their freight and volumes into those other port markets. That's going to have a direct impact on the rates that you see right now, because the volumes are going to increase out of those specific areas. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you think in the near future that's going to change what we're seeing right now today?
Great question, Jeff.
It's a really good question. And normally I'd have had the peers import data out yesterday. That's been delayed this week. So like everything there's some delays in getting the data. So I don't have June's data. What I can speak to is the data that came out in May, and it's sort of directionally on track. There won't be much change there. But if I could just pull this up quickly, volumes, there was this definite shift from west to east coast. At the coast level, east coast volumes were up. So this is in May. East coast volumes are up 9% year over year. West coast volumes were only up 1% year over year. So to your point, there is this ongoing shift.
Yeah,
there's a shift. Yeah,
there's a great article by Ari Ash in JOC Journal of Commerce this morning talking about how some of the East Coast ports have been overwhelmed, and you've got the Port of New York and New Jersey with a lot of vessels waiting to unload. Same with Savannah. So it's the analogy we used on the show a few weeks ago about this, the whack-a-mole effect. So we had all these vessels on the West Coast. And then they found alternate routing to Houston. Houston volumes are up 24%, as you said. A lot of Gulf Coast volumes. Gulf Coast volumes, Jeff, are up 23% year over year.
Wow.
So not huge volumes, right? Not huge volumes like the number 2 and 4 ports on the East Coast are New York and Savannah. So Gulf Coast sort of ranks way down the list. In fact, Gulf Coast ranks. I can't see it very quickly. Not jumping off me in the top 20, but their volumes are up substantially, and that sort of underscores what shippers have been doing ahead of the labour talks with the ILWU and the 22,000 port workers and 29 ports, which passed on Friday. And this was exactly what people were afraid of.
Oh, yes.
2015-16, when the contract passed. And when the contract passes, they lost the ability to appoint an arbitrator to immediately handle go slows, because we're not past the idea that people could not strike, but just go slow. And that will have a profound impact if that happens. So I think if you went back 6 months, what we were seeing from shippers, they were starting to reroute their cargo, and we're already seeing Christmas inventory landing now. Because people, and not to mention, back to school, people were really fearful of 6 months ago. Remember, the capacity was very tight and spot rates were high, so they were locking in whatever they could, and they were picking a routing that was the more safer, maybe the more expensive routing to get their goods in. So I think that's been sustained. Certainly, the ongoing labour talks over there aren't helping, but I think the bigger issue is the AB5 ruling last week.
AB5, yeah. I was just about to say that.
You brought that up yesterday.
Going on. Yeah, that's been going on for a while now. That's been on the table for
but I think a lot of carriers, some of the big carriers that have already made the change to an employee-based model. Yep. But I've been talking to a lot of owner-operators over the weekend, and they are really, really confused because they thought this would never happen. It was such a bizarre notion that they would lose their independence as owner-operators, even leased on. Because the leased on guys are the most effective because they've got to go from 1099s to W2s or get their own authority and work under that carrier brokerage model. So a bit like what people do with DAT's load board, where you can go onto a load board and pick loads from a multitude of brokers. I'm not sure even if that passes the B test, right, verifying your independence. But if you just think about the volume of freight that moves within California alone, I mean, this is not just a long haul problem. I mean, think about the carrier that runs 338 miles to Stockton and back on the I-5. That's essentially long haul mileage, right? You're doing round trip every day, dropping a 40-foot box off, running back empty. That's it. That's one of the busiest volume lanes that we see in our network for both spot and contract, and it's tied heavily to warehouse, upstream warehouse volumes that come in from overseas. And there's, there's a natural progression.
I think Long Beach and Los Angeles handles 40% of the inbound.
Yeah,
right?
It's probably closer to 45 at the moment.
Okay, to your point, talk about the volume. I mean, that's
right. And that volume's got to find a warehouse, got to find a home. And I think the bigger issue that everybody's talking about.
Do we really want to get into that?
They're still trying to find a home for last season's inventories.
Exactly. It's sitting in containers in parking lots and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, and I'm not going to go political here, but we all know what was implemented with the 24/7. It's been out there for a while. It's nothing new. It's been there, the Pier Pass for late night pickups to alleviate some of the pressure and congestion on the 405 and the grid pattern out there in Los Angeles. It's been out there. The problem is that there was no collaboration with the key stakeholders, the warehouse, the distributors, the CFI stations, cross docks, and everything. If you're on a 24/7 schedule, everybody has to be on the same schedule to have a shot at this, because the dray carriers are going into the ports. They're lifting these containers, taking the chassis out, and getting to the warehouse, and guess what? They're sitting there.
Nobody there. Exactly.
So it's not alleviating anything. It's actually adding more issues to the problem on that. And then you get into the appointment process where you're trying to get appointments to return the empties and the chassis, and the system is broken. Whoever read my post will see that. I mean, I think a lot of shippers out there, freight forwarders, anybody dealing with the ports will agree with me that that process is broken. It needs to be torn down, and it needs to be rebuilt from the bottom up, because you can't give out appointments if you don't have any room to bring it in. You should just say, sorry, we don't have that. But like I said in my post, I got it from the horse's mouth. I'm not going to mention the steamship line. He emphatically said, it's not our issue. The problem lies at the carrier and the client, that their inability to promptly return the chassis and containers to the ports in a timely manner is their fault, not ours. Bullshit. Plain and simple. They need to fix that because they're holding shippers and everybody else hostages. And they keep on sending out the emails and letting everybody know, if you don't pay today $400, we're going to double it for tomorrow. So guess what? You see all those posts out there with the steamship lines posting billions of dollars every quarter. Guess where that's coming from? I just speak my mind. I'm sorry, but
well, and you are right, but I think this is where you touched on in the beginning about collaboration and relationship. I mean,
absolutely,
we need this all. That's the only way we fix most of these damn headaches we're having. I mean, if we're fixing it one way and we're doing, like you said, 24/7 here, but the other guys are doing something else, there's no collaboration there. We're just causing more problems.
No, and the other thing too is that, how can you bring advisors into the government to look at the supply chain issues every couple of months? You need to have your finger on the pulse every day in this industry and supply chain logistics if you're going to move anything forward. You just can't arbitrarily come in 2 months and fix all the issues of the supply chain. It's not going to happen. Put the key players in there to know what the hell is going on and let them run the damn thing.
Yes, sir.
So Jeff, I can put some numbers around this. I just was reading the Ari Ash article in JOC this morning about dwell times, because this is sort of that ripple effect, right? And this will go back, I think, to one of your posts from a few weeks ago where you said that the import surge that we are going to see may be lower than this time last year, but it is going to cause a lot of chaos on the docks because our supply chain is still not fluid, and largely because of go back from warehouses being full, containers sitting on chassis trailers longer. You've got what you call higher dwell times at all the ports now, which backs up to can't get empties in and out. We have dock space filling up, and that backs. Then you've got fewer ship-to-shore cranes working per ship. Then you've got more ships backed up. So he put some numbers around this, which was interesting. He said that dwell times in New York range from 8 to 14 days. That's up from 5 days for the same 3-month period last year. So that's like double. Savannah average dwell times are 8.8 days. And Houston had fallen to 6 days at the end of June, but well above the 4-day long-term average. So this, the chassis trailer is the culprit again in all of this, but I think at the heart of it is the just this backlog of freight that's in warehouses and the inability to get those chassis trailers moving.
Yes. Well, the other thing too, Dean and DJ, is that auto parts that are coming in from Asia. There's a shortage of them and everything like that.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? A lot of those parts are used in building chassis. And that's why they're not able to build the chassis, because they rely on a lot of those parts that are coming overseas. Not too long ago, so it's just a cluster. It's just a major cluster.
Well, it's I think, Dean, it's the whack-a-mole. We just keep one problem and we pops up somewhere else.
I was struck by a reference on another show to the Kentucky Speedway. It was on Freightvine, Dr. Chris Kapler's Freightvine. He had Dale and Zach Rogers on, both academics from Zach produces the Logistics Managers Index every month, the LMI. Both academics, father-son academics. So it was a bit of a unique show in that you had, for the first time ever, father-son academics in the logistics space. But they were talking about, they made reference to all of the Ford pickups at the Kentucky Motor Speedway. And you should Google this and look at the pictures. And there must be thousands of pickups just parked. And this was last year. And the story was that mice had gotten into the vehicles and made home and eaten away a lot of the wiring, which they are likely to do if you leave your truck sitting around, as I found, with my truck underneath the hood of my Peterbilt turned out to be a beautiful spot.
Nice.
Yeah, they didn't last long, but so the problem was that they built all these cars waiting on semiconductor chips and parts from overseas. The rats got in, and of course now they've got to rebuild everything. So it's like one disaster after another.
It's just a chain effect.
But the semiconductor chip, I think, is still going on. I don't know. I haven't seen any truck order data come out recently. I think we're a ways away from having ACT research come out, but that'll be out shortly to tell us what orders are. They've essentially been on hold, though, because I think the bigger issue that Jeff was alluding to is truck fleets and truck manufacturers are reluctant to commit to orders next year because they really don't know what the cost of parts would be and even if they can get them, because that parts shortage is still ongoing.
Exactly. Crazy. What else you got for us, Dean?
I was having a look at some of the rates in dry van this week. I think they're certainly worth mentioning. We've seen spot rates in dry van, and this is, again, compared to pre-pandemic years, dry van rates are at $1.99 per mile. So if you remember back to May 2020, we had the May Day protests in Washington, and carriers were protesting outside the US Capitol. Spot rates they were talking about rates of $1 per mile. There's rates less than $1 per mile today on some lanes, some heavy backhaul lanes, right? But when you look at the average, of course, an average has a wide spread. You have some low rates and some very high rates. So when I look at our top 50 lanes, so we got like 65,000 origin destination pairings that we look at in the country. But if I look at the top 50, where most of the volume moves, dry van spot rates are averaging $2.39. So they're 40 cents a mile higher than the national average on our top 50 lanes. Right? So when people talk about doom and gloom and the market's crashing in spot rates, when you look at the average, and I always remember what Don Osterberg, who was VP of Safety at Schneider, said. He said, "No one's home at the average," and it stuck with me forever. And he's dead right. The average is like, no, he said, I don't care about the average. I want to look at the outliers. That's where the money is. And he's exactly right when it comes to making margins. But so last week rates ended at $1.99, first time they've been under $2 in a long time. The number is 40 cents a mile lower than this time last year, but 10 cents a mile lower than 2018. So not far off 2018, which was a really strong year, about 25 cents per mile higher than non-pandemic years. So we're still seeing a really strong freight market. We're still seeing incredible volumes of load posts in our network. Total load posts last year were just over 3 million. That's down 29% on this time last year, but 33% higher than 2018. So we're still seeing a really robust spot market. One of the things we've noticed is that brokers in the non-asset world have picked up a much higher percentage of contract freight through last year's RFPs. So follow that logic through, because normally the broker is going to be handling a lot of that spot market freight that sort of flows through the routing guide and out into the spot market as the loads get rejected by the carriers down the list. Because capacity was so tight last year, I saw two things happen. One was brokers picked up a lot more contract freight as well as spot freight for their shippers, which is why we're seeing a lot more volume this year. But the other thing that happened, a lot of carriers, smaller carriers, because capacity was so tight, shippers found carriers direct to bypass the broker. Which means you've got to work even harder on those relationships, because I know from being an owner-operator, your goal from day one is to get contract freight. Every time you go into a load, if you've got a brokered load, every time you go into a shipper, you are trying to think, how can I get this freight?
Yes,
that's your goal in life. So,
and brokers, you got to know what's happening.
Dedicated.
So I've got friends of mine that are running out of New England here, reefers, and he's averaging $4 a mile. He'll run from here down to North Carolina, South Carolina, up to Ohio and back. He's home every weekend, but he's averaging $4 a mile right now when the national average is half that.
Yeah.
So I think for carriers out there, there's still a lot of opportunity. For brokers out there, there's still a lot of work to be done. Shippers, they're still going to pay a premium on certain lanes because capacity is tight, where service is really, service levels are high.
Definitely.
But we're into that period now post July 4 where things cool off, and I think this will be really telling. If the EIA forecasts for fuel even close to accurate. They were predicting $4.78 per gallon by Q3, and just over $4 a gallon by the start of next year. So if that pans out, when I look at my modeling, and spot rates are going to drop off probably somewhere in the next 8 to 10 cents per mile in the next, before the end of the year, and they'll bottom out and then start to rise again. Okay. So even if spot rates drop and diesel comes down, carriers will still be at break even all the way through this year if you're only getting line haul rates, no fuel surcharge. So we are a long way from any form of calamity in the truckload market. But there will be some casualties because of the crunch. I think we've already passed it. I think the spike in diesel prices in March and April flushed out a lot of carriers really quickly, those that were already on the margins, especially the power-only fleets where they had an overpriced used truck and were power-only. I think when I look at the data and the some of the data I've seen on DAT's network, some of our proprietary data, it appears like that's already passed. So that fits with my modeling, because if you are still in the business today running line haul rates and watching your costs, you're still doing okay. So
yeah. Now with your crystal ball, with everything you just broke down, what do you see happening, I guess, in this next upcoming season of the back to school and the holiday?
Not a peak season like we would normally see in the traditional sense, timing wise, which I think, Jeff, am I right? Is it normally October when we see a peak in shipping volumes on the roadside?
Yeah, it really all depends. I mean, last week September, first week October, all the way through December in that range. But like you said, some of the shippers, a lot of shippers are starting to order them and get that inventory in now, a lot earlier because of the debacle of what they faced in the past.
So Gene Soroka, the CEO of Port of Los Angeles, said last year he saw inventory start to come in June, July, which is now, we're already seeing the same thing happen again. So I suspect, to answer your question, DJ, volumes are going to be certainly not surging like you would normally expect in October, because the old rule of thumb was if it's not in a warehouse by October, it won't be on the retail shelves by Christmas. Something like that. On the railroad side, the intermodal peak was normally September. I think that was even earlier last year. So I'm looking for fairly flat volumes. When you look at
that's what it sounded like. So it's going to stay maybe steady but flat.
Yeah, I think steady but flat, and spot rates have got on our forecast somewhere between 8 and 10 cents a mile to drop. We are forecasting right now, long range forecast, that sometime early in Q3 is when the market will start to show we'll head into the next cycle, which is when markets, spot rates start to increase, and then the drag effect on contract rates will start to take them up again. So that's what we're seeing, and I think what's moderating the supply side is the lack of ability to get new trucks out of factories. In some senses, that's been a good thing for carriers, not so much for shippers, who are looking for maybe a more of a bleed off in capacity and a more of a drop in contract rates sooner. I don't know that that's going to happen because of the elephant effect. I think they've got very good memories, as you guys alluded to at the top of the show. They are very anxious to make sure they don't play that game where they, in past cycles, they've actually helped exacerbate the market downturn by driving rates down, which only drives capacity out of the industry.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, DJ.
Yeah.
Let's check out the comments.
Yeah. Do we have any?
I think we do have a few.
I don't see.
What do we got here? We had hot dogs, RFPs.
I don't see any new ones. What was this? Pricing still, so that was Scott.
Yeah, we didn't talk about Scott's. That's an interesting one. Scott was talking about
here.
Still seeing a huge increase in quarterly RFPs. That's interesting. Quarterly RFPs.
Yeah. Sometimes shippers don't realize it takes time. Yeah.
What do you think would cause that?
It's kind of like a hybrid version of the annual RFP and the mini bid.
Yeah. Just a feeler. It's just a feeler to see what's going on.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. All right. Well, so here I got with your crystal ball. You went with your crystal ball. Now, I guess first Dean putting your shipper hat back on and Jeff putting your customer hat back on. What would you, I guess, advice or a guidance for those in that position still looking forward to this forecast of it staying flat, maybe not that peak season like we usually have at the end of the year with the holiday and back to school? Any advice, any guidance?
Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, I think service is going to be key, right? I still think there's a lot of shippers out there that are worried about service levels, more so than in previous years because of how bad things were last year. There's plenty of capacity in the market. There's plenty of people to choose from. The danger with cheap rates is lower service levels. So I think my advice would be anybody thinking about trying to recoup, pretty high procurement costs of last year, just you've got to be very cognizant of service levels. Not all carriers are the same. I can tell you that from my guys I know on the road. Some care about service, some care about the freight, others don't because they're pushing too hard to make ends meet right now. That means that they'll cut corners in a lot of areas. You've got to stick with your reputable long-term carriers that have supported you through those tough times last year.
Great point.
Yeah, and and I can't reiterate this more than I have, but it's all about collaboration. You got to consistently keep the line of communication open between the shipper, yourself, and the carriers, and talk about the future. Talk about the what ifs. Don't be afraid to ask the carrier, how can I help you? I know it sounds absurd, but you know what? And Dean will agree with me. Carriers have just as many needs as shippers. And if shippers would ask the right questions about the carriers, hey, how can I help you? What are you looking for? Where do you want to go? It adds volumes to the relationship. When you're trying to help them out, they're going to remember that. And they're going to call you up and they're going to see if you can help them. And on the backside of that, they're going to help you. But it's all about sustainability and keeping them in the mix, keeping them in the corral, feeding them annually, not when you need them or when you're trying to get a cheaper rate. You push them off to the side and then you call them up a couple months later and go, hey, I'm in a bind. Can you help me move this? You know what they're going to tell you to do? It's the nature of the beast. Again, you have to feed them annually, not just on a spot. That's the way you build long-term business relationships. And don't be afraid to reach out to your carrier rep and ask them, hey, how you doing? I haven't seen you in a long time. Why don't you stop by? Let's chat. I want to know what's happening in the market. What are you seeing? That would help me out, and vice versa. And especially if you're a shipper and you have new products and you're ramping up, make sure that you engage with the carriers to let them know about your new product line, your new lanes, and all of that ahead of time. Don't wait for the RFP to go out. If they're incumbent carriers, they're important to you, make sure they feel important. Tell them about it before you put it out to market.
Yes.
I can put some numbers around that because I think Scott just put some comment in there about updated pricing for the rest of the year.
It seems they essentially asking for updated pricing for the rest of the year, seeing the decrease in spot rates and hoping they can capture some savings in the second half of the year.
So here's the flip side of that coin, right, as it relates to capacity, because spot rates have gone up. Operating costs have gone up as spot rates have come down. Contract fleets are in really good shape, I think, generally, when you listen to a lot of the large carrier earnings reports from Q1. They've done exceptionally well. Their operating costs are probably in the order of, it could be somewhere between 15 and 20 cents per mile lower than an owner-operator, right? Depends on how much they've had to pay for drivers. But an owner-operator right now, operating costs this time last year, total expenses per mile were $1.73. That's all in operating costs for a long-haul owner-operator carrier, $1.73 a mile. Today it's $2.11. So they've gone from making 31 cents a mile to losing 39 cents a mile. Everything else remaining unchanged. Deadhead miles, fuel, lease payments not adjusted for inflation. So they've had a massive drop in profitability. They're still not in trouble because all I've got to do is drop my annual draw or salary from 70 to 60,000 a year, and I'm at break even. So I think when you talk about spot rates decreasing, to Jeff's point about having the discussion, shippers have got to be very open about what it really costs to run a truck these days, because a carrier can't pull back those driver wage increases that they've given them. Wages are probably going to be number 2 on their operating costs with diesel as much as it is. And I'll just give you the number. Diesel costs are right now at 88. So that assuming the same EIA ULSD retail price of 3 weeks ago, diesel is 88 cents a mile. 88 cents a mile.
What does that relate to as far as a percent of cost? Is it about 49%?
It's going to be, so my total operating costs are 211, so 88 divided to 42%, which is very high. Normally it'd be sort of low 30s.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be profitable, the carriers have to be operating around 25% or close to that, right?
Correct. Yeah, well, so that's a different number. Fuel as a percentage of revenue, right? That's fuel as a percentage of operating costs is 42%. But a fuel as a percentage of revenue is what I encourage carriers to do, is they're sitting in a truck stop and talking to a broker about a load. You can figure out how many gallons you need for that trip based on mileage and your MPG. And then you've got so 25% is your long-term target for profitability. If you can keep diesel at 25% of your trip revenue, you'll be profitable long-term. Today, it's 33% of revenue. So it's way higher than what it was in 19 when we had a lot of bankruptcies. That's why I always say to people, spot rates are still 25 to 27%, 7 cents per mile higher than pre-pandemic years. So even though rates have come down, operating costs have gone up, we're still not at sort of that crossroads where it's doom and gloom.
Yeah, I agree. Holy moly! So I agree with James here. We need to change Dean's name to the professor or the tactician. I agree. I second that, James. Thank you. All right, we're going to close it out. Unless you guys have anything you want to close out with, are you guys good?
I'm good.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
we got James as well. Great show, gentlemen. Jeff and Dean sending you a message after this show. Would love to connect. DJ, looking forward to speaking. Yep, yes, sir. Can't wait to catch up later. And what do we got? We got Scott. The data is extremely off from TF Truck Stop. Put out a couple weeks ago. That's great information to look at, Dean.
Thank you.
Hashtag the Dean of Data. Yes, I like that one. Hey, that might stick.
Like that, Scott.
I like that. The Dean of Data. We might. Yeah,
hey, there you go.
Scott. And thanks, guys. Yes, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody. Seriously, for joining us, for giving an hour of your time to us. Dean, Jeff, thank you for joining me today. This has been a lot smoother. Missing Dan taking the lead here. Batman will be back tomorrow, so I will assume my Robin role where I'd like to be. But thank you, everybody, as always, for joining us weekly. Sales Chatter Live, 9 a.m., 9:30, except for our Triple D days when we got Dean, Dan, and DJ breaking down the data, and then every other weekend we got every other week Jeff joining us in the hot seat here. So thank you, Jeff, for giving us your time as well.
Thanks,
Absolutely. Hey, DJ.
Yes, sir.
What's your quote of the day?
Oh, I got one, and I will finish. Thank you for asking. Oh, but I will finish again. Guys, thank you for following us. We will have it replayed. We do replay this on LinkedIn and on our YouTube channels. If you do miss this or it's too early for you live, we replay it again at 12 and at 3 o'clock for our West Coast peeps. Although we do have Lisa. Thank you. Throw you up there again. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us like you do. Quote to take us out is from Mark W. And I can't read his last name, so I cannot give you his last name. But it is, if you don't go through life with an open mind, you will find a lot of closed doors.
Exactly.
True.
Love that.
Think about that, y'all.
Yeah.
Have a great week, y'all. Happy hump day.
Yeah.
Centurion Trucking. Our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion Trucking and start designing your career today.